Welcome to the HawkCast with your host, AJ Hawk.
Kenny Florian is with us. Kenny, appreciate being on the show. I'd have to say, first off, I'm a huge fan of your work, what you did inside the Octagon. I know you're like a third-degree black belt in Jiu Jitsu, host of UFC Tonight, host of the Anik and Florian podcast. So you're a renaissance man. Also, BattleBots as well. So how have you always been that kind of guy, like that well-rounded?
I guess, man. I'm into a bunch of different stuff, and whatever interests me, I try to pursue and have fun with, man.
So what was crazy when I was looking some of the stuff up on you, so you played college soccer at Boston College?
Yeah.
On scholarship?
No. I walked on, and yeah, that's how that happened. Yeah.
How were you into jiu-jitsu at the time?
You know, I got into jiu-jitsu in college. Actually, a buddy of mine on the team, him and his brother mostly, was into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and was training with Royce Gracie. And I had watched a couple of the UFCs, and I was like, wait, your brother trains with Royce Gracie? He's like, yeah, man. He's like, he's actually hosting a seminar in New York. You should come down. And I went and did the seminar in New York and like trained with Royce Gracie. He taught it, and me and my brother were just hooked, like to the point where, you know, I was playing soccer and I played soccer my whole life, and all I could think about was jiu-jitsu, man. That's the only thing I could think about. I had this like mistress on the side called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that's all I wanted to do. I'd think about moves all day. I'd be in the shower, going to bed, whatever it was. All I was thinking about was jiu-jitsu. And my senior year, I got in a little fight with the coach, and not a physical fight, but, you know, we had some words back and forth. And you know what? I said soccer wasn't becoming fun anymore. I was like, I'm going to do jiu-jitsu. Screw it. I'm out of here. So that's what happened.
What year was that, your senior year?
That was in, 99 maybe? Something like that. No, not 98 maybe, yeah.
So, I mean, that really was well before like the official boom of the UFC and MMA, before like jiu-jitsu became more mainstream like it is now.
But before jiu-jitsu was cool, before MMA was cool, yeah, for sure.
So that was your first experience. You went to a seminar. So was that your first time ever rolling and getting out there?
You know, me and my brother, we were learning from tapes for like only like a week or two, and we were rolling on like in our basement on like a thin, disgusting green rug, and we were like taking each other down, slamming each other like on this mat. Like I don't know how we didn't bust our heads open, but we would just train on this thing and work moves and drill different moves, drill different things. We were just fascinated by it. And yeah, I remember my dad like recording us fighting for like 45 minutes, like, and then once we found out we could formally learn the art, we took this seminar. We competed in like a jiu-jitsu tournament only after like a couple weeks of learning. And my brother got first place in like the intermediate division, like only after a few weeks. I got second place, and we were just hooked, man. We just really took to it for whatever reason.
Now, when it comes to jiu-jitsu, going for that first class, I guess. So speaking from experience, my experience, so I've never officially even rolled with anybody. I have with the guy that I used to do some training with of everything, just for workouts. We would strike and kick the heavy bag, and then he would show me, we would grapple a little bit.
Yep.
And I always I seriously really do here in Columbus, Ohio, I'll look different places up and be like, oh man, check out classes. Like, man, I want to go roll. But it's almost like it's almost like an intimidating thing to go into these classes, because they'll say it's like a vague thing. I'm like, man, if I go in there, I'm a complete novice. I don't know anything, and I have to join a class of guys that are wearing gis and doing everything. How does that work? Like, how would someone like me go about just showing up for my first day?
You know, the hardest thing is actually going to the gym that day and being like, okay, I trust these guys to like not hurt me, you know, and it's a tough thing. And the key is like having a good instructor and having like that welcoming environment. You know, I was so lucky that when I went into Boston Brazilian Jiu Jitsu at the time, Roberto Maia, who was my instructor, he was so cool, man. He was so laid back, and he made me feel welcome. He made it feel like a family. And that first day, he was like, you guys bring your gis? I was like, yeah. He's like, go ahead and train. And that's the way it went down. And I think it's important having like a good class structure, one that's not like intimidating and one that's not about like who's trying to kick whose ass. It's important to like, hey, this is a place where we learn, where we train, and like if you're a dick about it, then you'll probably get weeded out. So yeah,
that seems to be the great culture. That's why I want to get my kids into it. I have a 5-year-old daughter and then a 3-year-old son, a 7-month-old son, and my daughter, she was in the little like Taekwondo class for about a month, and then we actually had to move away from it, but we talk about getting her into jiu-jitsu. She's a girl, so I'm like, if there's ever a situation you're going to be fighting like the guy, it's going to be a guy trying to take advantage of you, and you're going to have to fight your way out of it.
100%, man. And my nieces, my brother, who I own Florian Martial Arts Center with in Boston, he's got his 2 daughters involved. He doesn't put any pressure on them to like, you got to be a champion and do all that stuff. But he does, take them to work out and train. And, the self-discipline they get, the confidence they get, and the skills that they acquire doing those classes is huge, because whether they want to become a jiu-jitsu competitor or a fighter or whatever it is, more than anything else, it gives them confidence that like whatever they want to do in life, like you can do it. And that's what really helped me so much as a person was, man, if I could deal with someone, a bigger dude who's trying to punch me or choke me or trying to hurt me, and I can come out of it and defend myself and actually get that guy to give up, I'm like, man, there's nothing I can't do. I can do anything,
That's always something I think about. Your first fight in the actual like UFC. So I know you were on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, but that first time I've heard people talk about like the UFC jitters or whatever it may be when someone was fighting in Bellator or old school Strike Force, and then they come out and their first fight on the big stage, like the biggest stage in the world is the UFC. Did you feel that at all when you got there?
Man, 100%. I only had, I think, like 3 or 4 fights before I was on The Ultimate Fighter. And the guy I was going against, Diego Sanchez, I think he had like 15 pro fights or something like that. And that's a big difference. And for me, man, I remember I was warming up in the back room and I was hitting pads and I was exhausted after like 30 seconds. I'm like, what is going on? How am I getting tired? Like, I was preparing for 5-minute rounds and I was getting tired after 30 seconds. It was just my emotions getting the better of me. I started thinking about all the things that were beyond my control. I started thinking about, the contract, the money, who was watching back at home, all these things that don't really matter. I wasn't focusing on what I should have been focusing on, which was the moment and fighting and getting ready for that event,
And Diego just fought in this past UFC.
Yeah.
Joe Lozon knocked him out, correct?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yep.
And well, I mean, I know of Diego just from watching things with him, but that dude is nuts. What? I mean, I think kind of went viral. His interview he did Thursday, maybe before his fight.
Yeah, dude, it was crazy. Diego is extremely unique, and he's never really been normal to me. He's just a real unique character, a very positive individual, and he's funny, man. Yeah, I think he was that was his all-time best, that last interview for sure.
he looked so skinny and like, because I'm sure he was in the middle of his weight cut and everything.
Yep.
And
yeah, he was a little delirious. Yeah,
he had to be. Oh gosh, yeah. No, his face was Skeletor. And
yep.
That I know the UFC has changed their whole process just recently to where. Can you explain like how they weigh in now compared to when you were fighting?
Yeah, man, I wish they had this, especially when I was cutting down to 145 pounds when I looked like Skeletor. But so now you get a lot more time to weigh in. So, you have the TV weigh-in, which is at like, let's say either 1 o'clock or 4 o'clock. But now you get like either a 2-hour or a 4-hour window to weigh in. It's like somewhere between like 8 and 10 a.m. or like 7 and like 11 a.m., something like that, where you have that amount of time to weigh in. Now, you only get one shot at it. But what it does is, for a lot of the guys that are waiting to weigh in, that just want to weigh in as quickly as possible, it really helps them because it gives them more time between weigh-in and the fight to rehydrate, to get the food back in them. And it's tough because on fight week, you don't really sleep a lot. If you're cutting a lot of weight, you're just hungry and you're miserable. You don't sleep a lot. And it means you can get up that much earlier, make the weight cut first thing in the morning, get on the scale, and then you're done. Being at the weigh-in and having to weigh in, let's say you weigh in the morning and having to wait till like 4 p.m. to weigh in is a miserable feeling. It is awful. So as a fighter, you want to get it over with. And then as a fighter and as a competitor, you want to have as much time to replenish, the glycogen that you lost, the water that you lost, all that stuff. So you just feel much better. I think we're going to get better performances because of it.
But then they changed the IV thing. What?
Yes.
Do you agree with them not letting you guys rehydrate with IV bags?
Well, at first I didn't, and then I understood why. They explained why, and the reason, I guess, is just because of if a fighter's using performance-enhancing drugs, what they could do is they could flush out that out of their system by using an IV. So I guess that's why they do it. I guess the Lance Armstrong thing. I guess that's apparently how he used to help beat the tests. He'd get a couple IV bags in his system, and he'd flush whatever he had in his system out of there quickly. I don't know. I guess that's why they do it more than, but. It's tough because, in some ways, I feel like it does force a fighter to do the weight cut that much more professionally. But also for those guys that are right on the cusp of like maybe making it or not, it affects them the next day and it maybe puts them at harm and not getting all the fluids back in them. But I think it all balances out by having this new weight cut process or weigh-in process. I think it gives you more time to replenish and get the water back in you.
Why don't guys just fight at what you walk around at?
That's a common question that we get, and I think that there's some validity to that. It is a valid question. I think that for any type of competition, there's like the weight that you walk around at, and then there's your fight weight. And for a lot of guys, they say, hey, if I can make a certain weight, I'm going to try to do it. I want to be the bigger mass. When you get two things that are colliding, usually the bigger mass is going to win. That should have the advantage, but it's not always the case. For a lot of these guys that make too big of a weight cut, they don't have the energy to go out and perform. Like when I fought Jose Aldo and when I fought Diego Nunes at 145 pounds, I just had no energy. I put everything into my weight cut, and I had nothing left for the fight, which was terrible. So I learned the hard way about those things, but. It is what it is. Certain guys are going to take that risk, try to make that weight, try to get to the lower weight so they can have that advantage to be the stronger and bigger guy.
Now, when you fought 145, what were you walking around? What would you walk around at, say, 2 weeks before that fight?
So 2 weeks, I was probably about 165.
Man, so 20 pounds?
Yeah, and I probably walked around about 180.
True.
So I went from 180 to 145 pounds,
So you went into that training camp around 180?
Yeah.
And how many weeks was your camp?
I was always training. I never really took time off. But I'd say it probably took me 2 months from 180 down to 145, something like that.
So you made the 145
twice.
Yeah, and then what did you weigh come fight night 24 hours later?
I think the first fight at 145, I think I was 167. And the second fight, I think I was about 163.
How do you do that? Like, what are the secrets? I know I've watched Dolce take people through it. I don't know if he's doing it as much anymore, but I used to watch a lot because he was working with Ronda, and he had a whole process. I know you. What is the whole deal where you guys flush your system by drinking tons of water, and then you don't drink much water, and you let it just naturally flushes you?
Exactly. So basically on fight week, there's like a protocol. So typically if you're going to fight Saturday, I think you start water loading on Sunday. So you basically, like throughout camp, you want to get about a gallon of water in you anyway, since you're training hard. But so once it starts like on Sunday, you do about, let's say 2 gallons of water. Then you Monday, you crank it up to about 2.5 gallons. And then Tuesday, you'll drink 3 gallons. That's what I was doing. 3 gallons of water, dude. And you're just constantly peeing like every 10 minutes. It's brutal. And what it does is it helps get the salt out of your body. So it flushes all the salt and all the minerals that might be retaining water. And then it also kind of tricks your body into thinking that more water is coming in. So you're going to be draining water and sweating a lot easier. So when you go into the tub or when you go into the sauna to sweat it out, your body will sweat out that water a lot easier than, say, if you weren't drinking a lot leading up to that point. So so much of our body obviously is made up of water, and if you deplete yourself of that water, you can lose tons of weight. Now that's not like, for like your girlfriend or your wife at home, or like, that's not the way to do it. That's not the real way to lose weight. It's just water weight. It's all like, But so in order to make the scale weight, that's what fighters will do. They'll deplete themselves of water. They'll take the glycogen out of their muscles so they can lose extra water. So when they put it back in their system, they gain weight super quickly.
It made me think of I bet some frat boys going on spring break or do that. So they want to look good the first couple days of spring break.
Get some alcohol in you, deplete yourself of that, and be out in the sun, and you're fine. You're all set.
Oh, think about how lean they feel.
Exactly.
Just for like the first day, though. That's the problem.
You're for exactly.
Wow. So were you a sauna guy, or were you tub, or everything? How's that work?
I did sauna, man, and I wish I tried the tub. Basically, they'll go into like a hot tub, and your head will be exposed. Obviously, you're not dunking your whole head in there, but they'll put alcohol, rubbing alcohol and Epsom salts in there to help draw out the water, and they'll do like 10-minute intervals and lose like a couple pounds at a time. I never did that, and I felt like that would have helped my big head stay a little bit cooler, but. Being in the sauna, it could be tough. And man, there were some brutal sauna sessions. Like I was in there for hours to make 145 pounds. That was terrible.
Is that considered a professional weight cut or non-professional?
Professional, yeah.
So what's a non-professional then?
Non-professional, let's see, would probably be doing things like super last minute, like trying to cut an insane amount of weight like on a short. Now that's what we're doing, but like. I guess there's like a percentage of body weight that you don't want to mess with, like on fight week. So in a week, you don't want to lose more, than say, I don't know, 15 pounds. And it depends on your weight class, and it depends on your body mass ratio and all that stuff. So yeah.
Well, this is pretty inside baseball, I guess, as they say, on the MMA world for people that don't watch MMA or UFC, whatever. But I know it's big news. The UFC recently sold for $4 billion, all this stuff. Does that change anything that you're doing with hosting and everything?
As far as I know, no. I don't think anything's going to change probably for the next couple years, I would assume. I think they'll probably want to keep everything kind of like status quo, but you never know, man. Again, learning from my fighting days, I try not to control what I can't control. I try to focus on my job and do the best job I can. But as far as my role, who knows? I really don't know. It gets tricky, because a lot of these guys are, maybe William Morris, they're going to bring their own guys in to try to do the commentary. Who knows? I don't know. Who knows? So I just try to do my job the best that I can, and I hope that these guys take the sport to the next level, man. We'll see.
Do they want to get into China? Was that the big deal?
I guess there was part of it, like that there was a Chinese group that was a part of the deal. That they, so I don't know if they're still a part of the deal or they're in the background or not. But I guess I guess China is a huge market for us, and I'm sure they'll be trying to get it, get UFC various TV contracts over there, whether they're involved with them or not.
Who's your favorite fighter ever to fight in the UFC or any other group?
Jeez,
I asked this because I have the UFC Fight Pass, and I've been while I work out. Sometimes I'll put on old school fights.
Right.
And I'm watching guys that I've heard of their name really, and especially old school back in the day, like UFC, like the first couple UFCs when it's just awesome.
Oh. It was amazing, man. That's what got me into the sport. And because of that, I got to mention Royce Gracie, of course. I got to mention Royce Gracie. I got to mention Rickson Gracie. Those are two guys that, I'm doing this, or I fought because of them. They inspired me to get into the sport. So I got to mention the Gracies, Renzo Gracie, of course. Those are guys that I always looked up to and appreciate. And as far as like the modern day fighters, there's the George St. Pierre's, there's the Anderson Silva, those are guys that are just super impressive and that showed a dominance at a time when they were, they helped bring this sport to what it is too. So they were pioneers to a certain extent.
Now, did they really cut Daniel Cormier's salary in half for the fight, his last one?
I don't think so. My understanding is that he got paid the normal amount. Now he gets his normal salary, but he also gets a percentage of the pay-per-view.
Mhm.
Now maybe that's what people were referring to, that because it was Anderson Silva and not John Jones, that he maybe made half of what he was going to make, because the fight with John Jones is a huge fight. Now both of these guys kind of need each other. Daniel Cormier is not a big draw without John Jones, and John Jones isn't a huge draw without Daniel Cormier. So I think by the fight not happening, they both lose out on a lot of money. And Anderson Silva coming in last minute, as a late replacement, I think he's a huge name. He was the best name they could find to replace him at the time. But I don't know how many people knew about that change. I think they saw that Daniel Cormier wasn't going to fight John Jones, and they're like, screw it, I'm not getting the pay-per-view. Or, I don't need it. So I don't know how many people really knew about the last-minute replacement of Anderson Silva. I'm talking about the common fan, not the hardcore fan. So I think that's probably what they're talking about, is that maybe Daniel lost that on a bigger payday because John Jones didn't fight.
Yeah, John. So John, for people that don't know, John Jones, they popped him, tested positive like Wednesday night of fight week. I think it was Wednesday.
Yes. Yes.
USADA came in, and how long has how many years ago did the UFC turn everything over to USADA?
I think it was 2015, so not too long, like about a year and a half. And the reason why it came out on Wednesday was basically it takes a while to test for all of these supplements. USADA doesn't just work with the UFC; they work with different organizations, and they test for people, all over the world. And some of these labs obviously get backed up, they get busy, and they test for they're not just testing for one thing. They're testing for thousands of things that it could be: recreational drugs, performance-enhancing drugs, all those things. So I guess that's why it takes so long. And they tested them back in June. The test came back, and they had to notify John Jones prior to the fight, and that's the way it went down. It was unfortunate, and timing-wise, it's terrible because of all the things that John Jones has been dealing with, and missing out on a huge payday like this is awful, man.
And then Brock gets popped as well.
Yeah.
By the time I post this, it might come out what he has, the substance. Have they made that public yet?
They haven't, and I guess USADA's policy is kind of, I think it's because of the HIPAA law, that because it's medical information, they don't release it unless the fighter releases it first. So if the fighter tells everybody what it is, then they can kind of go into detail on what it is and how it was tested and all that stuff. But I guess until then, USADA has to keep quiet, and I think eventually we will find out. I'm assuming it's some kind of performance enhancer, but who knows, man? It's been a crazy time.
How did John Jones, how did it get out that he tested positive for estrogen blockers?
So I guess it was released by John Jones. Actually, no, sorry. It was, I think, Chael Sonnen.
Yeah, Chael was the first one to jump on it, from what I saw.
Rashad Evans and Chael Sonnen, I think, were the first two to kind of let everybody know what it was. They had the inside track on what it was, and they released that information. And I think after that is when John Jones, started talking about it, and then after that, USADA started talking about it, the NAC started talking about it. So it's coming out that he tested positive for 2 types of estrogen blockers, and it's tough because my knowledge of why estrogen blockers are used is because it's for people that are coming off of a steroid cycle or some kind of performance enhancing drug cycle, that they use it so they won't build up estrogen, so they block the estrogen in their bodies and also build up testosterone at the same time. I do. Well, a lot of those things aren't governed by the FDA. We don't know what's in those things, and it's tough. I want to give John Jones the benefit of the doubt. I would like to believe that he's talented enough where he doesn't have to use that stuff. But then people are saying, "Well, listen, look at his history. Look at this guy. He doesn't care about anybody. He's been willing. He'll be willing to take those risks." So, I don't know which way to go on that. I think the whole thing's unfortunate. I do feel bad for John Jones, but at a certain point, you got to think, how much responsibility is he taking for this? And at the end of the day, as a professional athlete, you saw it as testing you for a bunch of these things. You don't just put anything in. Don't just grab any pill that someone gives you and throw it in your mouth.
Especially if you're trying to reclaim your whole career, your whole life, basically, in that fight.
Right. Exactly.
That was the thing.
No, for sure.
Well, what another interesting thing that I heard Chael Sonnen say was, because Chael sounded like he tested positive for everything you could possibly put in your body.
Right.
Even when he explains it, I mean, it's great to hear him talk about it. But he was saying how is there another test out there, because the one that they popped him for was June 16th. I don't know what was the date of UFC 200. Was it like July 1st, around there?
July 7th, I believe.
Okay,
Yeah,
so he was saying, well, if this guy is getting tested, like he had to have more tests, I would think, after June 16th. So Chael was saying, is there another test out there that's going to maybe show more?
It's possible. I think it might be Chael getting a little excited, but who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, he's right. It's possible, but until we hear anything on that, we don't know.
Yeah. Were you surprised that Brock got busted?
Brock, I was not surprised. I was not really surprised. The guy's a huge guy, and I like to think that, listen, there are a lot of hard workers out there, and there's some guys that are very physically gifted. They're just are. I think Brock is physically gifted, and he's also probably using. So, we all want to believe in superheroes, but perhaps he's a little bit too much like a superhero,
He is. Now, yeah, I mean, no one was shocked. Just looking at the dude, yeah.
Right.
It could easily be a combination of he's super gifted and he got some help.
Right, exactly.
I mean, then what do you have? You have Brock Lesnar, a guy that comes out after a 5-year layoff and handles a monster like he did and wins.
Yep.
How hard would that have been to take 5 years off and get in a fight and come and fight an absolute monster like Mark Hunt and do really well?
I'm telling you, man, there's very few people in the world who could do that. I said that before he was tested positive for steroids, but I would say that even still after, regardless of the extra help, it is still extremely difficult. There's very few athletes that can do that, especially a guy who could take that much time off. There's very few guys that can win the UFC title in only 4 fights and beat Randy Couture in his 4th fight. I mean, that's absurd. That's unbelievable. You got to be some kind of special talent, special beast to be able to do that. So he's an impressive athlete, but now with these allegations, it's like, well, now what do we think about it?
Now people are gonna. Do you think MMA has that same stigma like baseball, to where your whole career is tainted?
I think it's going to be that way, unfortunately, for the next year or so. I think until USADA kind of weeds out all the users and kind of catches people, once that starts to die down, I think people will start to kind of have more respect and trust in the sport. I think they're doing a great job. Obviously, it's working. And I see these things. I see the Brock Lesnar thing. I see the John Jones incident as positive things for the sport, because what it's going to do, it's going to trickle down to the rest of the fighters, and any other fighter who's using, they're going to go, wait a sec, it's not worth the risk. I'm going to get caught just like these guys, and it's going to be a deterrent for sure.
You would think it would. Yeah, it's going to have to be, and it seems like USADA is the top of the chain when it comes to finding out. You can't really beat the test right now. At least I'm sure people are trying.
Yeah.
The whole Balco deal and Victor Conte, I know he always would come out and say that you can be one step ahead, and I don't know, man. That's a ballsy move.
It's risky. It's super risky, and at the end of the day, it's going to be it's a battle of chemistry. You know what I mean? Like who has the latest stuff? Is it the steroid makers, or is it the test? The guys who are building the test. So it's like. And I know that USADA and the guys at the labs, they're very secretive of how they do what they do and all that stuff. So it's a big cat and mouse game, man.
Switching subjects quickly about training camps. So you guys have these 8-12-week camps, I know, and people talk about it. And you said you were a guy that you worked out all the time. So it's like I never really understood the whole hoopla of saying like, oh, camp opens for me. I'm like, well,
right.
Like I work out all the time, and I like to work out. I would imagine if you're going to fight, you're going to be keeping up pretty consistent training throughout the year, no matter what.
You got to, and you should. Listen, I wasn't the type of person who was sparring, 5 days a week. I think that's also a problem of why we're seeing so many injuries. So I think there needs to be a balance. Like I think you kind of need to train similar to how a triathlete trains. Like if I'm preparing for a triathlon, okay, I'm not doing a triathlon every week. I'm not running a marathon and biking for miles and I'm trying to peak for the event. So I'm kind of training in these peaks and valleys that are going to keep me healthy, so I'm not just running my body into the ground all the time, but I'm always drilling something. I'm always learning something. I'm always trying to evolve and get better as a fighter skill-wise, but not trying to beat up my body every single day, And so some of these guys, they'll train hard, they'll beat themselves up for 2 or 3 months, and then they won't train for 2 or 3 months, and then they'll start doing it again. So it's hard to get your body back in the mode. You get out of shape, and then you kind of get these, your weight fluctuates, and now you're struggling to make weight, your body's out of whack, you're not healthy. It's just like the perfect storm. But then there's other guys that are training so hard all the time that they're beating their body up to the point where they're getting injured, and we're missing out on these amazing fights because of it. That's
the most frustrating thing I've seen. And here's a theory I want to throw out there. And you being a professional and fought a lot, you would know better than I would. But I've seen recently these guys coming off getting called up on 10 days notice, like Nate Diaz and strangling Conor McGregor. I mean, He said he was sipping tequila on a boat in Mexico 10 days before the fight, and he comes in and it was an awesome fight for the short amount of time it was, and he wins. And he's like, "Oh, think of what I had with a full camp." And I was like, "No, I don't know. You might have been hurt in your if you had a full camp." And I know Nate said, "Well, if I'd had some good sparring sessions in a full camp, I don't think Conor would have even hit me." So, and then Bisping comes in late and knocks out the champ Luke Rockhold, and Bisping's the champ for the first time in his career off of a similar time frame, I think. So, I think getting to the fight healthy seems like the number one thing.
I 100% agree with you, man. And I think guys take that, go hard mentality, to the extreme. I'm sure it was the same case for you. When you were playing football, your body probably felt a hell of a lot better at the beginning of the season than it did at the end of the season. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just going in day after day after day, and you were training hard all summer long, but like you're not getting those bumps and bruises that you had, late beginning of the season that you have late in the season. It's the same thing with a fighter. These long camps, these long, brutal camps, guys go overboard with it. And I think part of it is the wrestling mentality. A lot of these guys that come from the wrestling mentality, it's great because they're so mentally tough, but more isn't always better. And these guys are grinding. We have to do strength conditioning. We got to do striking. We got to do submission training. We got to do all these things. And if you're doing all those things 100%, your body just can't take it. I don't care. I don't care who you are. Unless you're just some kind of freak or you're on something, then you could do it because your body can take that workload, that volume of training. But very few people can. That's why we're getting all these injuries. So we have to find that balance of feeling good prior to the fight. I think that's the most important thing, is being in shape, but feeling good.
Just being in shape. I think you hit it saying you got to drill. And
yes.
The old school mentality was, I know guys would spar every day and think that they had to blast each other, it seems like. Has that died down from the gyms you've been at?
I think it's changing, man. I really do. For me, that's what I always did. I try to be smart about it. And the fact that, hey, man, we only have one brain. We have one head. And if I'm sitting there sparring every single day in, day out, like I'm going to take punishment before the fight, during the fight, after the fight, and it's just this vicious cycle. And you want longevity for your career too. So you got to protect yourself, man. You can't be sparring. You can't be doing crazy strength conditioning workouts. I think it's important that all the coaches communicate and they all get on the same page and be like, hey, man, I drilled them hard in this. Go easy over here, or and kind of balancing out all the training, because sometimes the coaches don't communicate and they have no idea if the guy's working hard or not.
How does that work with all your different coaches? Is there any place that you can do it all in one house, like one shop, or do you have to jump around?
There's very few places, man. There's very few places on the planet that you have it all in one place. I think Jackson Wink is one of the rare places where you do have it. I think Team Elevation in Colorado has it. So whatever it is, if you have it all in one place, that's better. But also, if you can't do it all in one place, you got to make sure that all your coaches are communicating and they're all on the same page on how hard you're working. And one way to do that is to test your heart rate in the morning to see how, if you're overtraining, if you're recovering properly, all those things. Just doing it in a more professional manner, man, and making sure that you're not running your body into the ground.
Now, that it's a weird time for the UFC, I feel like. And I didn't even expect this. I didn't plan on talking so in depth on the UFC, but I think you could probably tell by my question. I love watching it. I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
I think I did the same thing to your counterpart, John Anik, as well. Just asking, but John didn't fight, so I got you on here.
Right.
You're a fighter,
Sure.
which is cool. For me, I saw something one time when you said about after one of your fights, you learned about yourself through like some adversity. Is that something to where when I look at like a Ronda Rousey, she faced adversity. I know she was in judo in the Olympics. I think she took the bronze home, and she was devastated. She didn't get gold. And then we see Holly Holm kick her in the head and knock her out cold. Boom, fight's over. Her whole life comes to an end. She's doing an interview months later saying she's talking about wanting to kill herself and all this. Is it better for someone maybe to lose early in their career?
That's a great question, man. I think so. I actually think so. And the reason for that is you have more realistic expectations of who you are as a fighter and the fact that you need to constantly evolve and get better. Like, it's so difficult for someone like Ronda because she blew up so quickly and she didn't have a whole lot of experience. When you look at how many fights she has, she's not like a 20-fight veteran. She didn't have a whole lot of fights. And she blew up so quickly, and she had this whole entourage and these people around her. She's on the front cover of magazines. She's on huge talk shows. She's been in big movies, big commercials. So she's everywhere. People talking about her as the greatest living female athlete. And I'll tell you what, if I put you in a room and I keep telling you that to you enough, over and over and over, you're going to start to believe that. And now when you start to believe that, and you go out there and lose in a devastating fashion, your whole world crumbles. Your whole identity, the way that you see yourself just falls apart. And it's in pieces all over the place. And you got to pick up those pieces and start to kind of put this image of yourself together again. And in many ways, it allows you to see the reality and get you to realize, hey, listen, everyone's beatable, man. There's no one that is unbeatable in this sport. And, you can't just do all these interviews, do all these movies, do all these commercials, and train properly for a fight. This sport it's evolving all the time. There's some really dangerous fighters out there, and you got to be ready for them. And I think it was tough for Ronda to get shot up all the way up here and then go all the way back down. And it's a blow to the ego. And I hope that she's able to recover from this. Like, I know that, like you mentioned her Olympics or the fact that she got a bronze in the Olympic, she still thinks about that. She still will cry about that. So how she's going to come back, or if she's going to come back from this loss to Holly Holm, is going to say a lot about her character. I think she's capable of doing it. I think she's an extremely strong person. I just think that, unfortunately, and I think we all would be in that position to a certain extent, we start to believe that. And when you start to believe that image that everyone else created for you, it's very, very dangerous.
She was like not the first, but one of probably the biggest mainstream star from the UFC. I mean, there's guys like Chuck Liddell was huge and Randy, but Ronda was in like the Entourage movie. She had like a decent sized role. Like she wasn't doing a cameo. Like she had a legit part. And then they talked about her remaking Roadhouse, which actually just broke my heart. I hope that never happens. Don't do it, man. Dalton, do not ruin Dalton's legacy.
Exactly. I'm crazy about Swayze, baby. I love it. So listen, I think you're right, man. I think you're right that she was, probably the biggest star we had ever seen. She was bigger than Conor. She's pulling in these million by pay-per-views, and she's all over the place. I mean, I've never seen more celebrities tweet about a fighter than Ronda Rousey. So she obviously she's connected with a huge fan base, and I hope to see her back. And not for me as a fan. I know that she can overcome this and become a better person and better fighter because of the experience and be able to come back and show who she is.
What's her status right now? Where is she at as far as fighting?
Good question. I don't.
Is she healthy?
I don't know. I don't know if she's training. I don't know if she's. I heard that she was filming a few movies, but again, in this sport, you can't just kind of take that time off. You can't take a year off without training and come back and expect to be the best fighter in the world. The sport's just getting too good. People are evolving so fast. So I hope that she's still training. I hope that she's still healthy and taking care of herself because if she does want to fight, it's obviously going to be in her best interest to do that.
Is it going to be Holly Holm, her first fight back?
I don't know. So Holly is fighting this weekend. She's fighting Valentina Shevchenko, who is not an easy fight. The way that they match up, she's a tough matchup for Holly. So Holly's going to be fighting in the main event against Shevchenko. And if Holly wins, that could be the rematch. That could be the rematch. And I think it would be one that'd be very interesting.
How upset would Amanda Nunes? She's the champ right now, correct?
Yes, she
well,
is.
then I guess she would probably fight the winner of Ronda Holly.
Yeah, that's the way I would like to see it go down because I don't think Ronda should. Oh, listen, I think Amanda is going to be a handful for Ronda, so I don't think Ronda should be able to come back and fight Amanda right off the bat. I think a rematch against Holly Holm will probably make sense.
Who was the? Did you ever have a guy that you fought where they close the door behind you? Big John McCarthy, whoever says, "Let's get it on." You get out there, and your first shot you take from the guy, you knew you were in trouble.
Yeah, BJ Penn.
What weight class did you fight BJ?
Penn. That was at 155 for the world championship at 155 pounds. And yeah, he caught me quick off the bat. I overcommitted on a punch, and that was the first time I had been knocked down. He knocked me down. I was still trying to get my wits back. I lost my equilibrium. He caught me with a big shot, and that was like early in the fight. And I think he ended up beating me in the 5th or 4th round. So. Yeah, man, like it was tough. And even prior to that, I think I had so much respect for BJ where I had him on a pedestal and I was like, oh man, BJ's been one of my heroes for so long. And I gave him so much respect that I think I lost the fight before it even started, and that's not a good way to start a fight.
How do you recover from that? Like you said, you lost your equilibrium.
Yep.
You went down. What do you just try to grab and hold on to him until you can see straight?
Exactly. Either I think in that case, I think I tried to grab onto him or I tried to kind of run around and get some space before he tried to finish me off and get my wits back and get my full senses back. I think that was the key is either creating space, keep him away from you, or actually getting close to him and kind of hugging him a little bit like boxers do, or in MMA, you kind of get to the clinch where you can kind of not take the big blows.
Do you ever feel like you get your wits completely back though during that fight?
I think I did. It's tough to say though. It really is because in that moment you're not quite sure. Like time doesn't really make sense. You'd like to think that you're fine, but maybe not, man. Maybe I wasn't all the way there. It's tough to tell.
That's what kills me is amazing, but it blows my mind when I see guys get dinged early and they kind of like, all right, well, he's in trouble. You can hear you guys yelling, oh, he's a bit wobbly. And I feel like I have a keen sense of knowing when someone has been dinged up and is a little bit knocked out just from playing football and watching teammates and knowing how it feels. I can tell like if someone, that got him. And
yep.
I'm sure you guys can tell better than anyone. And when they come back from that and then like catch a guy and win a fight, it blows my mind. And I think the one that comes to mind was Dan Henderson's Shogun, I think was the second time they fought. It's like they both knocked each other out like 5 times, and then Dan came out and beat him and knocked him out. And Dan wasn't even there, I feel like, when he knocked him out. Yeah,
it's insane, man. Certain guys can just take more punishment than others, I think. I think physically and also, actually keep maybe if they don't have all their senses, but to stay focused enough or to want to have that will to keep on fighting to look for that knockout. You know what I mean? It's a rare quality, and seeing those moments in the UFC is what makes the sport so great. You're like, how the heck was that guy able to do that? Now, on a physical level, these guys are taking damage, but as far as entertainment value, they're bringing, and it shows what is possible for humans, out there, what they can deal with the type of punishment that they can take and that they can dish out.
Is Dan Henderson going to fight Bisping again? Is that coming up?
That's what's going to happen. Dan Henderson, Michael Bisping. I think that the UFC sees a lot of value. They obviously have a history. Dan Henderson knocked Bisping out cold, coming off The Ultimate Fighter, one of the most brutal knockouts I had ever seen. And Dan Henderson says, he wants one more fight. And you know what? Give it to him. He's a legend. Michael Bisping wants to avenge that loss. He's obviously, Michael always says, I always see that highlight of me getting knocked out. He goes, I want to put an end to that. I want to erase that, and I want revenge. And Dan Henderson, I think, is that kind of legend and that kind of fighter where I think he deserves it. And listen, are there other guys who have been performing better than Dan Henderson lately? Absolutely. You have Jacare. There's an argument for a free, maybe even Rockhold for a rematch, based on what he's done. Yoel Romero is going to be eligible pretty soon. There's a lot of great fighters out there, but I think Dan Henderson will sell. I think that's a marketable fight and one that I think Dan Henderson deserves based on everything he's done in the sport.
Who was it that Dan just knocked out with the back elbow to the back of the ear?
Hector Lombard, a guy who is as dangerous as anyone out there at 170 and 185 pounds, and no one gave Dan Henderson a chance, man. The last thing to go, as they say, that cliche thing to say is last thing to go is power, and Dan Henderson, you better believe he still has power.
I've gotten to know Dan a little bit over the years through some different marketing things, and I hung out with him a little bit, and he's awesome. He's just such a wrestler. He just has that mentality.
When I picture Dan Henderson, I picture him in his farm, either putting a horseshoe on a horse, having grease on his face, going out there, on the barbecue. He's just a man's man. He's that dude that, if I got in a fight and I could pick some people to be with me, I'd have Dan Henderson with me.
Yeah, and he's not that big. He's he fights at 205.
Yeah, this is the guy who knocked out Fedor Emelianenko, the greatest heavyweight of all time, and he's 200 pounds. He knocked out one of the best heavyweight fighters of all time. So that's the kind of power he possesses and that kind of grit and determination that he has. He's
a guy that I feel like one of the few that has come back since because he was a known TRT guy. He got an exemption, the testosterone replacement therapy that the UFC used to allow, and Dan's actually continued and won some fights after they stopped allowing that. And it seems like a lot of the guys that got off the TRT aren't the same.
Right, no, exactly. And I think Dan has looked the same pretty much.
He has. You're right.
He still kind of has that power. A lot of guys haven't looked the same, and I think Dan Henderson really didn't change. I mean, even physically, he still looks the same. So, I think, I think he's been looking great.
Yeah, he's good. I know Vitor, what do they call him? TRT Vitor? Back
right.
Vitor's just head kicking dudes to Mars.
Right, and that's the big contrast. If you look at Vitor on TRT and Vitor off of TRT, he really does look like two different fighters.
He does, man. Well, Kenny, I'm going to start to wrap this thing up, but where can people find you that want to check you out?
Thanks, man. I'm hosting UFC Tonight on FS1. Check out that. I'm still doing BattleBots. BattleBots is on ABC on Thursday nights. Check that out. You can check me out on KennyFlorian.com, on Twitter at KennyFlorian, or Instagram.
Just quickly before we go, what does it mean? So you're considered a third degree black belt. How many degrees are there?
You can go all the way up to 10th degree, but there's only one 10th degree at one point at any given point. And 10th degree is like the Grand Master. Elio Gracie had one. I don't know who has the 10th degree black belt now, but so you basically get it after a certain amount of years of training. You get another stripe on your black belt, and right now I'm a third degree. I think in another year I get my 4th degree. So yeah, it doesn't mean anything to me. To me, it's just the belt doesn't really mean much, but to me, it's just man, I'm always learning, always trying to learn and get better at this, and enjoy it, man. I'm very lucky that I still get the opportunity to keep training, man.
Awesome. It's the process that counts. Yeah. That's what it sounds like, man. Staying present. So, all right, Kenny, really appreciate it. Thanks so much, and look forward. I'll talk to you down the road, man.
AJ, you're the man. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're glad you could join us for today's conversation. After you subscribe to the show, head over to thehawkcast.com or reach out to AJ directly on Twitter at @officialAJHawk to recommend future guests that will help us inspire people to keep talking. Thanks again, and we look forward to speaking with you next time on the HawkCast.